She walked out from the wings like she was hoping nobody would look at her. That was the first thing everyone noticed, not the voice, because the voice hadn't happened yet, but the smallness of her. A 13-year-old in a leather jacket 2 sizes too big for the moment, head dipped, hands fidgeting, eyes flicking up to the judges and then away again like the lights themselves were a thing she had to brace against. Simon Cowell asked her name and she answered so quietly that the cameras strained to catch it. Courtney Hadwin from County Durham, in the northeast of England. She liked singing, she said, in a voice barely louder than the hum of the studio air conditioning. Mel B, watching this trembling girl, leaned forward and offered a small kindness. A few words of encouragement, the kind you give a child who looks like she might bolt. Nobody in that theater, not the judges, not the thousands in the seats, not the producers in the gallery, had any idea what was about to come out of her. They were looking at a shy little thing. They were about to meet a lion. The band started up the opening of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle, and for a half-second she was still that nervous girl, hesitant, finding her footing. And then she opened her mouth and the entire room rearranged itself. The sound that came out was impossible, a graveled, soul-soaked, full-throated roar that belonged to a singer who had been working juke joints for 40 years, not a teenager who still had school the following Monday. It cracked with grit and longing. It dragged the melody around by the collar. And as the voice erupted, so did her body. She stomped, she spun, she threw her hair, she moved across that stage with the loose-limbed, electric abandon of Mick Jagger or Tina Turner, every gesture pulled up from somewhere ancient and instinctive. The shy girl had vanished completely. In her place was a performer fully possessed by the music, and the transformation was so total, so abrupt, that the audience didn't just applaud, they came up out of their seats in something closer to disbelief. Simon's eyebrows shot up. Heidi Klum sat bolt upright. Howie Mandel pressed both hands to his face. Mel B, who'd coaxed this girl into singing at all, watched her gamble pay off 100-fold. When the final note rang out and Courtney froze in place, chest heaving, the leather jacket and the loose waves of hair and the wild eyes all of a piece now, the theater detonated. And then, almost immediately, the most striking thing of the whole night. The second the music stopped, she shrank right back into herself. The lion folded up and the shy girl returned, looking faintly stunned at the noise she'd caused, mumbling her thanks, retreating back inside her own shoulders. It was as if the voice lived in a separate person who only existed while the song did. Howie Mandel was the first to speak, and he could barely contain himself. "You are not from this era," he told her. "You're from a whole different era." He was a huge Janis Joplin fan, he said, and he started telling a story about Clive Davis going to the Monterey Pop Festival in the 60s and seeing a young woman nobody had ever heard of, a girl with a voice like a force of nature, and signing her on the spot. That girl was Janis Joplin. Howie wasn't Clive Davis, he said, and he couldn't hand her a record deal. But there was one thing he could do. He reached forward and slammed his palm down on the golden buzzer, and golden confetti came pouring down out of the rafters, drifting onto the stage and into Courtney's hair as she stood there blinking, hands over her mouth, completely overwhelmed. The golden buzzer meant she skipped every other round of auditions and went straight through to the live shows. Simon, never the easiest man to impress, summed it up in his own blunt way. "Bloody hell, Courtney," he said. "You were this shy little thing when you came out. Then you sing and you're like a lion. I mean, genuinely incredible." A lion. The word stuck because it was exactly right. Backstage afterward, catching her breath, the soft-spoken girl from the Northeast tried to explain how it had felt. She'd been so happy, she said, that her eyes had filled up with tears and she could hardly see. That was the whole of Courtney Hadwin in a single image. The most ferocious voice on the stage attached to a kid so gentle she was crying backstage because a man had been kind enough to believe in her. None of this had come from nowhere, though that's how it looked to the millions who would soon discover the clip. Courtney had been singing seriously for years before America ever saw her. She was born on the 6th of May, 2004, and grew up in Heselden, a small village in County Durham, in a tight working family, her parents Paul and Anne-Marie, a younger brother and a younger sister, both a few years behind her. She'd fallen for the old soul and rock and roll records young, the kind of music most kids her age had never heard, Etta James, Tina Turner, James Brown, Little Richard, Janis Joplin. While other children chased pop charts, Courtney was teaching herself to sing like the greats of half a century earlier, hour after hour, a self-taught artist building a voice out of devotion and imitation and sheer stubborn practice. She often pointed to one specific spark, being about 9 years old and watching another young girl take the stage on Britain's Got Talent, and feeling something light up inside her, a recognition that this was what she wanted, this was the thing. From that point on, she chased it relentlessly. She auditioned for her first real singing competition, Teen Star in Newcastle, back in April 2015, when she was only 10, singing Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love, and she reached the grand final. The shy girl who could barely speak in interviews had, even then, already learned the secret that would define her, that the stage was the one place the shyness couldn't follow her. The proof of how hard she'd worked was scattered all across her early teenage years, in a string of small victories that the viral fame would later flatten into a single overnight moment. In September 2015, a clip went semi-local of her singing Say Something, the soaring Great Big World and Christina Aguilera duet, during lunchtime at her school, just a girl standing up among her classmates and unleashing that voice over the clatter of a school hall. In April 2016, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award and reached the finals of another awards ceremony. In July 2017, she stood in front of more than 18,000 people as the opening act for Sister Sledge at a South Tyneside Festival concert, a crowd most established musicians never play to, and she was barely a teenager. In January 2018, she sang in Southampton at a charity event raising money for children with life-limiting illnesses. And the biggest stepping stone of all came in 2017, when she competed on the very first series of ITV's The Voice Kids UK. She made it all the way to the final of that show, singing James Brown's I Got You, I Feel Good, in the semis, and in the final, the towering Torch song, And I Am Telling You I'm Not Going from Dreamgirls, before being eliminated as a finalist. She didn't win, but she'd stood on a national stage, learned how television competitions worked, learned how to handle the lights and the cameras and the nerves, and gone home to keep practicing. So when she walked out onto the America's Got Talent stage the following year looking like a frightened newcomer, the truth was that she was already a seasoned competitor who had been quietly grinding for half her life. The shyness was real, but so was the experience underneath it. What none of her earlier successes had done, though, was reach the world. The AGT audition did that, and it did it on a scale that nobody could have predicted. The clip of a tiny British schoolgirl transforming into a 1960s rock and soul powerhouse hit the internet and simply would not stop spreading. Within a day, it had racked up tens of millions of views. News outlets everywhere picked it up. People who had never watched a minute of America's Got Talent were sending each other this video of the 13-year-old who sang like Janis Joplin reincarnated. By the time the live shows rolled around and she made her second appearance on the first live broadcast of the season, the audition had already been viewed, by the host's count on air, over 200 million times. 200 million. The number would eventually climb past 300 million, making it the single most viewed video of that entire season of the show and one of the most watched audition clips in the program's history. The contrast that made it irresistible was exactly the thing the judges had seized on: the gap between the girl and the voice. Online, people watched it on loop trying to reconcile the two. The sweet, soft-spoken kid who looked at her shoes, and the snarling, hip-swinging force of nature who took over her body the instant the band kicked in. Older viewers who'd been at concerts in the 60s swore she moved and sounded like the real thing, that she'd somehow channeled an era she'd been born 40 years too late for. Younger viewers had simply never seen anything like it. And running through nearly every comment was the same protective tenderness, a hope, repeated over and over by strangers, that fame wouldn't change her, that she'd stay grounded and sweet, that the music industry wouldn't take this gentle, gifted kid and grind the softness out of her. People felt they'd witnessed something rare and fragile, and they wanted to guard it. With the golden buzzer carrying her straight to the live rounds, Courtney now had to do the hardest thing in any talent competition: prove the audition wasn't a fluke. The whole world had seen the lightning. Now they wanted to know if she could make it strike again, on command, week after week, on live television, with the votes of millions deciding whether she stayed or went home. For a shy 13-year-old, this was an almost unimaginable pressure. And the way she answered it was to do the only thing she knew how to do: pick songs from the old masters she loved and detonate them. For her quarterfinal, she chose James Brown's "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag," and she tore into it with the same ferocity that had made her famous, dancing and growling and commanding the stage. And all four judges, Howie, Mel B, Heidi and Simon, rose to their feet. She got enough votes from the public to advance to the semifinals. Notably, she'd been given the very last slot in the running order that night, the closing position, the one reserved for the act the producers expect to land hardest. She'd earned the anchor spot, and she'd justified it. For her semifinal, she went somewhere different and even bolder, choosing Steppenwolf's "Born to Be Wild," a full-throttle hard rock anthem, an unusual swing for a teenage girl, and she rode it all the way. The headline that ran afterward captured the whole phenomenon in one line: a shy teen shocking the audience with "Born to Be Wild." Howie and Simon were on their feet again. The votes came in, and Courtney advanced once more, this time over two other strong acts, Noah Guthrie and Christina Wells, both of whom went home so that she could go through. She was now in the finals of America's Got Talent. And there was something else that made her run remarkable beyond the performances themselves. She was the only British act to reach the finale of the whole season. Out of all the singers and dancers and magicians and novelty acts from across the United States, this one small girl from a village in County Durham had outlasted nearly everyone, carried by a voice that didn't fit her body and a stage presence that didn't fit her age and a public that had fallen, collectively and protectively, in love with the strange and wonderful sight of a caterpillar becoming, as Howie had put it on the night he buzzed her, the most beautiful butterfly he'd ever seen. For the finals, Courtney reached for Tina Turner's "River Deep, Mountain High," one of the most demanding vocal showcases in the entire canon of soul, a song that has defeated grown professionals, and she threw herself at it with everything she had. Once again, all four judges stood. By any measure of the room, she had delivered. But the finale of a competition like America's Got Talent isn't decided by the room, it's decided by the country, by millions of phone votes split across a dozen acts, and the cruel arithmetic of that night didn't fall her way. When the results came in, Courtney had not gathered enough votes to make the top 5. She was eliminated, with the act continuing in her place being Michael Ketterer. The girl whose audition had been seen by hundreds of millions of people, the betting favorite for much of the season, the only British act left standing, would not win. She had one more moment on that stage, in the grand finale itself, performing alongside the rock band The Struts on "Could Have Been Me," and then circling back to the Janis Joplin connection that had defined her from the very first night, singing "Piece of My Heart," the Joplin classic, the song that closed the loop on Howie's original comparison. And then it was over. She went home not as the winner of America's Got Talent, but as something arguably more valuable, a global discovery, a name the industry now knew, a 13-year-old with 300 million views and a worldwide audience waiting to see what she'd do next. The losing, in the end, mattered far less than the being seen. Plenty of people win these shows and vanish. Courtney had lost and become a star. The proof came fast. In December 2018, just months after her elimination, Courtney signed a record deal with Simon Cowell's Psycho Music in partnership with Arista Records. The shy girl from Heselden was now a signed recording artist before she'd even finished being 14. The very next month, January 2019, the show brought her back for a spin-off, America's Got Talent, The Champions, gathering standout contestants from around the world. And here Courtney did something that signaled where she actually wanted to go. Instead of another cover of one of her 60s idols, she performed an original song of her own, "Pretty Little Thing." It was a statement of intent. She didn't want to be only a tribute act, a clever impersonator of the greats. She wanted to be an artist in her own right, writing and performing her own material. All four judges gave her standing ovations again, and the show's superfans voted her into the top 3 of that competition, alongside Christina Ramos and the ventriloquist Darcy Lynn. She didn't take the top spot there either, but the message had landed. She would later be named among the 50 top contestants across all of America's Got Talent's many international editions, in a list spanning nearly 200 countries, a permanent marker of how far that one audition had carried her. Through 2019 the momentum kept building. In October of that year she released her first EP, a record titled The Cover Sessions, leaning into the thing that had made her famous, her ability to reinvent other people's songs, but pulling them from her own generation this time rather than her grandparents'. The collection featured her takes on Harry Styles' Sign of the Times, Lil Nas X's Old Town Road, the Jonas Brothers' Sucker, and Louis Capaldi's Someone You Loved. It was a clever bridge, the same soul-soaked, gravel and honey voice that had channeled Otis Redding and Janis Joplin, now applied to the contemporary charts, proving the instrument wasn't a nostalgia act but something that could live in the present. There was even a moment when it looked like the fairy tale might get a storybook capstone. She was booked to perform at the 50th anniversary edition of Woodstock in August 2019, an almost impossibly fitting stage for a girl forever compared to the icons of that era. But at the end of July the festival was cancelled amid a tangle of organizational problems, and that particular full-circle moment slipped away before it could happen. It was a disappointment, but a small one against everything else that was going right. And then came the harder, quieter, more important part of the story, the part that doesn't make viral clips. Being signed to a major label as a teenager is a dream, but it is also a kind of cage. Decisions get made for you. Your sound gets shaped by committee. The very softness and authenticity that strangers online had begged the industry not to crush is exactly the thing an industry is structurally inclined to crush. At some point, the details of which were never made public, the situation shifted. Psycho Music wound down its operations, Courtney's contract passed to the label that inherited Psycho's roster, and eventually she and that label parted ways. For a young artist, this is the moment that breaks a lot of careers. The deal evaporates, the machine moves on, the viral moment recedes into the past, and the world finds a new sensation. A great many talent show discoveries never release another note after this point. Courtney did the opposite. She took the setback and turned it into independence. The first sign came in 2023, when she released a new original single called Breakable on YouTube and the streaming services, her own song, written with the producer Kevin Bowe, on her own terms. When a longtime fan left a comment on the video mentioning Simon, the man who'd first signed her, Courtney replied directly, and her answer was the whole arc of her story compressed into a single sentence. It was all her for this one, she wrote. Completely independent. Finally doing it her way. That phrase, finally doing it my way, is the real ending, far better than any trophy would have been. The shy 13-year-old who couldn't get her name out above a whisper, who needed Mel B to coax a single note from her, who cried backstage because a stranger believed in her, had grown into a young woman releasing her own music, by her own choices, answering to no one. Breakable was followed by more originals through 2023, That Girl Don't Live Here, in April, the soulful ballad, Call Me Back, in July, and another the following autumn.